Running is one of the most basic forms of exercise, but that doesn't mean it's simple. The mechanics of running have been studied by countless individuals and analyzed in advanced labs to better understand this fundamental movement that millions of people do every day. Parameters like stride length, foot strike, and pronation, which is the natural foot roll experience to distribute forces properly, among others, are all important in determining how well an individual performs and how likely they are to get injured. Full gait analysis is usually only available to the most elite echelon of athletes, but new wearable devices have greatly increased access to valuable personal running data for runners of all skill levels. People are most familiar with wristwatch type wearables that normally measure heart rate, position data, and can extrapolate stride parameters based off accelerometers. There are others, such as heart rate monitors to be worn around the chest, and smaller exercise monitors that can be worn as a ring around your finger. An obvious location for a running wearable is on the foot itself, where runners would be able to directly measure how hard and fast each part of their foot is striking the ground. This is exactly what the company Nurvv is working on, a smart insole that is made of an array of pressure-sensing pads to measure and analyze each footstep you take. Due to their high resolution and data rate, the insole is able to measure your pronation, stride length, running power, and running economy, as well as give suggestions through their app on what steps to take to improve your running performance and decrease your risk of injury, based off your own personal running data. I had the opportunity to talk to Grant Trewartha, a biomechanist working at Nurvv, about how the insole works, what advantages there are for runners to use it, and what this insole could be used for in the coming years. Could you give me a little bit of your background? I saw you did some work with rugby injuries.
Yeah, sure. So I guess by training, so as I left school, I went and did what we call in the UK a sport and exercise science degree, but maybe kinesiology as far as the States are concerned. So that was an undergraduate degree. Enjoyed that. Stayed on and moved into do a PhD. So that was a bit of a departure for me. My PhD, it was good fun, but that was trying to develop, this is sort of late 90s, a sort of a video-based method for marker-free tracking of movement, which is a very popular thing to do now, but it was kind of new at the time, and that was good. Spent 3 years doing that. We tend to do PhDs a little bit quicker across here, and moved straight into a faculty position. So I moved university down to University of Bath. And spent 15 years there within a sport and exercise science group, albeit we were in a bigger department for health unit or faculty. 15 years of research, of teaching, of management in a faculty position. So again, they quite quickly got more interested in the biomechanics. Typically, at least in sport and exercise, you view it as, you're either looking at movement, you're looking at human movement typically, and either to improve a performance, so maybe optimize the technique of an athlete, or perhaps to reduce injury. And those two things aren't mutually exclusive, but that tends to be the two primary goals. And I very quickly gravitated to the idea that, I'm more interested in the injury prevention side. And that was doing primarily biomechanics based studies, so analysing human movement, understanding why people were doing things certain ways, what effect does an intervention have in terms of perhaps reducing the load on the body and still allowing the performance to happen. Did through that time start kind of branching out a little bit more, partly into the clinical sense, doing a little bit of musculoskeletal modelling, computer simulation modelling, and with the rugby studies, rather than just look at the biomechanics of things, we actually wanted to say, well, what difference does it make to injury? So that takes you into epidemiology, essentially. So injury surveillance and understanding, the interventions that we were making. Does it actually have an impact in sort of the real setting, and does it reduce injuries when the athletes are out on the pitch? So yeah, primarily, for a good decade there, it was mainly rugby union, mainly injury prevention. And that kind of took me up really to the point where I guess I decided a bit of a change would be good. I'd done academia for 15 years, felt like experiencing a different type of environment, and the opportunity came along to move into a sort of startup sports technology company. So that was 2016. That's when I joined Nurvv.
Was there a reason why you worked with rugby in particular as opposed to another sport?
Yeah, well, good question. I was a lot of personal interest. It was one of my sports that I was playing at the time. It's I know, well, rugby is a growing sport in the States, so probably more people familiar with it. It's obviously a pretty dynamic sport. It's a collision sport. So for someone that was interested in, generally speaking, sort of dynamic movement and injuries, I guess there's a fairly natural a natural fit there. And at the time, it was myself and there was a group of us at Bath that, kind of started to do rugby science research in general. But probably there was an opening there, was a niche there. The research within rugby union was kind of in its infancy. There had been work done, there had been research done, but there was lots of areas of the sport that were, I guess, sort of untapped in terms of sports science research. So a few drivers, but a lot of personal interest, and just there's lots going on a rugby pitch that are it's interesting from an injury prevention point of view.
What got your interest in kinesiology and biomechanics in general?
As I say, I guess that's going back to sort of school leaving days. So that's a long time ago. But mainly, yeah, it's the mix of sport and science. That's basically what it boils down to. Definitely playing lots of sport as a youngster. Science. Whether it was, and to be honest, at the time of going to university, I think we have this thing where you do a list of, at the time I think it was 6 courses you can apply for. Well, 5 of them were chemistry, and I had 1 kinesiology course on the list, and I don't know why, but I just decided that was going to be the direction that I headed in, and I haven't regretted it. But it's the mix of sport and science really was the driver.
So skipping ahead to, I guess you said 2016, when Nurvv kind of started out. Can you tell me what was going on then?
I mean, just I guess now a fairly typical sort of startup situation. We're fortunate. Our founders have of Nurvv have a very successful other business that's in the sort of impact protection, so phone case type. They make phone cases and for other peripherals as well. But they were in the obviously in the impact protection field. They knew that they wanted to maybe branch out and see whether the sort of the impact protection side of things could be applied to other fields, and just decided that actually a separate, rather than doing that within the the existing business, they would spin out essentially and do it through Nurvv, a new venture. And so the very original ideas was to bring, because they were having to do quite a lot of testing of their phone cases and impact situations. There was they were beginning to get build up some knowledge and an IP around sensors in order to do that testing. And the idea with Nurvv was to bring those two things together, the sort of impact protection and the sensing side of things. And as it transpired through our very sort of initial market analysis, and we knew it was going to be sport was going to be the first thing to move into. I got talking to them. There was I guess the first few people through the door talking about options, and actually they, for the most part, the impact protection thing just slipped into the background a little bit, and it became more about the sensors and about the wearable technology. And we did some work, and when we felt that running was probably it was a natural place to start as a sport within its own right, but also a sport that you do, or many people do, as part of their training for other sports as well. So that was, I guess that's the genesis of Nurvv. And there was a development cycle to go through, and eventually we launched Nurvv Run, which is our first main product, right at the beginning of 2020. So we went through sort of a launch phase that nicely coincided with a global pandemic, but there you go, these things happen. So that's I guess the sort of the very beginnings, and a sort of a 3-year sort of development cycle with usual thing, lots of obstacles, lots of learning to be done within that in order to try and get a product out the door.
How did they find you, or were you previously friends with the people involved?
No, actually, it was. I mean, going back to to be honest, going back to the rugby injury prevention side of things. So I guess I was in a group and working with the research group at Bath. The first few people at Nurvv had obviously had some internal conversations. The original idea was to this impact protection sensing, so kind of smart protection in sport. So we actually, as a research group at Bath, did some consultancy for Nurvv basically. So it started out as a consultancy opportunity for me. That's kind of my I guess my personal link into Nurvv. It just kind of snowballed from there. I guess from I don't know what you'd have to ask the founders and the early people at Nurvv what they thought, but from my personal viewpoint, it was a case of seeing that here was a group of people in industry that were interested in I guess doing things properly. I obviously had a lot of enthusiasm for it. It was definitely in an area that I was already engaged in, and I guess it fell at a time when I was still enjoying the whole academic side of things, but I was ready for another opportunity. So when it boils down to it, I guess it was sort of consultancy that turned into a more of a full-time employment.
Okay. So we've talked to a number of people on this podcast that have started or are starting startups. And could you contrast your experiences working in academia to what you're doing now at a startup?
Yeah. So lots of similarities, particularly if you're focusing on saying a lot of the time in if you're at a sort of a research intensive university, so you're spending some time in. I would say the research in the academic sense is not that dissimilar to the type of work and the way of working within within startup. Obviously, you'd probably the teaching side is a bit different. I've not really taken any of that forward, but from the research and development point of view, lots of similarities, I would say. In my personal situation, I guess I was at a point where I was sort of managing quite a lot of research, and one of the drivers for me moving over was to get back into the sort of the nitty gritty of doing the technical stuff, because I guess that's maybe where I enjoy things. There is an argument, I think, certainly within the startup environment, there's lots going on. You definitely have to be quite flexible, because typically you're in a smaller group. You don't have the support services around you, the different departments. So if there's, if I'm a scientist, but maybe there's more of an engineering task that needs to be done, well, in the university, that there's going to be people that you can immediately go and talk to. In the startup, maybe you delve into some other areas that you wouldn't necessarily have to within academic research, because so you probably become a bit of a jack, more of a jack of all trades, get your feet wet in different areas. I think that's a good thing. I enjoy that part of it. Certainly moved into some areas, ever so slightly more sort of engineering wise, ever so slightly more marketing wise. I don't think I would have got to as an academic researcher. So all of that's been good. I think you definitely get open up, and as a scientist in a startup, you definitely see more of and trying to get a product out the door. It's genuinely multidisciplinary. So it's not just, some scientist, I'm working with a scientist that knows some slightly different stuff to what I do. That's a collaboration. Or, somebody in a different group or the next door lab, and you say, we're kind of different, so we can collaborate. But I mean, the differences are bigger. You're working with, it's marketing, it's firmware engineering, it's the hardware side for a wearable technology product. So the element of multidisciplinarity, if that's a word, but the different backgrounds of people that you're talking to is broader, and that's exciting. I think that's good as well. I definitely like that about the sort of startup environment, that you're genuinely working with people that are coming at it from a different perspective, and sometimes that takes you get all the challenges within that in terms of you're not quite speaking the same language, or you don't view the world in the same way. But that's both challenging and good. So yeah, maybe a couple of the differences between the two environments.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I'll personally say something that I find unattractive about following down kind of a straight physics academia path is you're so deep in one extremely, extremely specific niche. And I kind of like to do everything poorly rather than do one thing really well, which it's not great in terms of job prospects.
it is an interesting, and you're right. If you're genuinely going to push back an area in science, then obviously you need to, that needs to be your focus. But I agree. For a long time that was, but even when I was in academia, you could argue I was too much of a generalist. I was sometimes doing a bit of epidemiology, sometimes doing biomechanics, blah blah blah. I know you need certainly in academia. I think you need people that are really willing to go into the depths at the same time as you need some people that are willing to become a bit more generalist. But I think industry, particularly in a small group startup environment, you probably, I guess a startup can't afford to carry too many. If everybody, you can't afford to carry pure specialists in all areas and people that are only very, very narrow, because it's just, there's too much bases to cover, and you're in a small group.
Can you say roughly how many people work at Nurvv? Is it a dozen or like 100?
Yeah, no, so it's in the region of 20 to 30. So we're still, I would say, a small group, even though we've been in existence for a while. But I think we're in the region of 20 to 30. It's quite nice. It's not always, it wasn't always like this at Nurvv, but we've managed over the short time that we're there, that we do actually have in-house sort of we can do the end sort of, so to begin with, we were perhaps building our first app, doing an awful lot with it, nothing wrong with it, but you're working with third parties, and likewise our firmware engineering was initially with a third party, all good people, very skilled people, but it wasn't in-house, whereas that's taken us a bit of time to say, actually, and I think particularly for the type of product that we were developing, I think we have managed to accelerate things when we can actually do the, from the, very, I guess, the creative sort of planning side of things, all the way through to the logic, the hardware, the firmware, and the app development side of things as well. It's so it's a small group, but it's a group that can actually take things through from beginning to end.
Yeah, the full stack of it.
Yeah.
Could you just summarize what is Nurvv Run?
I will try. Yeah, it's it's a wearable technology product, very much focused for runners. And at the moment, we're talking mainly about endurance running rather than sprinting. No reason that we couldn't be applied at some later stage to sprinting, but at the moment we've concentrated on what we feel is the important features for endurance running. So as a wearable technology product, we have some sensors. We are primarily foot-based, so that's maybe one point of difference to what people might be used to. A sports watch is a piece of wearable technology. It's obviously wrist-worn. Runners are very comfortable and used to wearing watches. We decided quite early to go foot-based for a couple of reasons, but the main one being that from the very start, we were keen to make sure that via Nurvv Run somebody could understand what they were doing, what their running performance was in the usual way, speed, distance, time, but also to give the runner more information on how they were running. So essentially their running form. Now, and from the foot, you can do a bit more than you can from the wrist. I'm not saying that you can do everything that you'd ever want to do, but in terms of the some of the important metrics for runners, whether that be describing the stride, so cadence and step length, and describing what the foot is doing during contact. So not every runner, but a lot of runners interested in how their foot's hitting the ground. So foot strike, rear foot, midfoot, forefoot, or how much the foot is rolling as it contacts the ground. So that's pronation. So these are things that quite difficult to do from a distance, but we have sensors. So really a combination of pressure insoles. So we've got thin insoles that fit in underneath the original shoe liner. So you basically take the shoe liner out, put Nurvv in underneath, and you've got some thin pressure insoles there. 16 sensors in each foot, or under each foot. You put your shoe liner back in. And then from there we have 2 pods or trackers that attach onto the side of the shoe, or connect the insole to some electronics, and the trackers have their own technology or own sensors in there as well. So they deal with the data coming from the insoles, but they also have their own sort of IMUs, GPS receiver, barometers in there as well, so that we can do we can do the performance side of running, and we can also do the technique side of running. And we then talk via Bluetooth to either a running watch, Apple Watch, Garmin Watch, or we can talk direct to the phone app. So we have. I mean, that's the basic situation. I guess, in addition to the drive to give a bit more information around running form, whether that be after the session, but we also wanted to give that runner the runner that information during the session as well. So we do a fair amount of real time coaching, I guess, or at least technique feedback during a run, and that can be delivered either via simple stuff on the watch. You can glance at a phone, but we felt from the start that a nice way to do it would be through audio as well. So nearly all of the feedback that we give on the screen, we also give via Bluetooth headphones. So it is possible to run with Nurvv in quite a few different ways. So interacting with watches and phones and headphones, or you just let it do its own thing. There's a button on the side of Nurvv that allows you to run phone free, which you get all the information, but you just don't get the real time. We don't have any way of delivering the real time information. So, but different runners like to run with different quantities of feedback. Some people like it just at the end. Some people like it during the run. So we try and cater for most of that. Most of those situations.
Could you give me an example? Because I saw that I think that it's called Run Coach.
We've got Form Coach, if that's the one. Yeah, Form Coach.
So would you be running, for example, and you'll hear something in your ear that says take longer strides or shorten your stride? Is that the kind of thing you'd be hearing?
Yeah. I mean, and we've moved, generally speaking, to try and do things via tones. The verbal side of things is, again, not everybody's the same, but typically it's a bit quicker and a bit more. I think it's a bit more friendly to do things via tones. We do have some verbal feedback in our product as well, but so you're very close to the mark. So Form Coach is a relatively recent feature that we've brought in that has been a few years in development. We've kind of done we've done the studies, and then eventually we've managed to get it into the product. But we were keen. I think I mentioned, say, okay, how are you running? What's your running form? How does that link to either maybe how healthy your running is, or what your injury risk is? So we have a running health feature where we take the metrics that we measure, that we know from research have an influence on injury risk, and that goes into running health, and that provides a bit of a loop, I guess, in terms of the injury prevention side. Form Coach is our way of looking more at the performance piece. So we have I guess it's a dependent variable, but in Form Coach, what we're trying to do is optimize running economy. So that's our performance metric. So rather than choose pace, or because people want to run at different paces depending on distances or and ability, but we know that if a runner can maximize their running economy, that makes a big difference directly to performance. Either they can run a given distance faster, or they can run for longer, if they can run essentially more efficiently. So what we're trying to do with Form Coach is say, okay, we're going to try and help you maximize your running economy for this given pace that you're running at. So you tell us your preferred distance, what pace you're hoping to run it at, and we will look into your running, your profile that we've collected ever since you've owned Nurvv, and we're going to show you that, okay, this is when you run your typical running form, your cadence, your step length, your foot strike, this is your running economy. But actually, over here, your running economy, you actually run with better running economy over here when your technique combination is a little bit different. So maybe when you run with a slightly higher cadence than normal, maybe you drop your step length. In rare occasions, maybe instead of running rear foot, you run midfoot, your running economy actually improves. And that's specific to you. So we're not saying this is a universal rule for all runners, but it's in your profile. This is where you run best because it optimizes your running economy. And Form Coach kind of looks at the profile. We chunk each run down into very short 50-meter sections, and we look at, okay, for this 50-meter section, what was the economy, the cadence, the step length, the foot strike? And then we say, well, that's fine. We've got all of that information, and we know that running economy over here is maximized, and this is the technique mix that allows that to run it. And Form Coach is about trying to then say to them, in this pace bracket, this actually, from a form point of view, a technique point of view, this is maybe where you want to be because it maximizes your running economy. And that at the moment is what Form Coach does. And it says, okay, so maybe actually if you up your cadence by 3 steps per minute, you're going to run with more economy. And then we can take people out to our cadence workout. So it's a coached workout where they can then, they can break it down. They can build a workout that helps them progress through to to run with that higher cadence. So it's a feature that really tries to help on the running performance side of things and link technique or running form to that performance metric.
Okay. Could we take a step back and just talk about running itself for a moment? So you mentioned, I'm curious to know what are the variables you care about for running. It sounds like there's stride length, cadence, and foot strike.
Yeah, no, I mean, of course there are more, but at least with some of those, that's probably where I would start. Certainly from a running performance point of view. I mean, I think there's a really nice, in a way, nice mechanical relationship that is well known, but at the same time, I think sometimes underappreciated within the running community, which just says that, okay, if speed is your thing, if you want to increase your running speed, well, in order to do that, you've got basically there are 2 things that make up running speed. It's cadence multiplied by step length. So cadence, the number of steps you take per minute, multiplied by step length, how long each of those steps is. You multiply cadence by step length, and that is your running speed. And there's nothing you can do to make that not true. That's the mechanical relationship. Now, there are lots of things that you can do that will then impact upon what cadence can you achieve or sustain, what step length can you achieve, and that's where you maybe get into more of the physiology, the sort of physiological or the training side of things. But that mechanical relationship, I think, is a nice place to start. So speed equals cadence times step length, because really everything else can come in underneath that, and you can begin to start thinking about, okay, well, how do some of the other metrics maybe influence that? So, as I say, and that could be more on the physiology side. So how do you maintain a step length, and what's required? But yeah, that from a performance point of view, those would be the 3 metrics I would start with: speed, cadence, step length. We have other metrics that are a bit more on the, you could argue, on the injury side of things. So pronation is, it's a mixed bag in terms of what what people currently believe now. It used to be the case that overpronation needs to be avoided, and that's the whole thing around, to be honest, running footwear has been since the 70s. Is kind of, you've got overpronation, we'll put you in a pair of support shoes or motion control shoes. And again, and that kind of changed slightly to say, well, actually, let's remember that pronation is actually a really important part of the running foot contact. It's a way of the body absorbing some of the energy of the impact, that initial rolling of the foot. So you don't want to be landing with a rigid foot, which would be under pronation, and that can lead to injury as well. So it's this sort of idea. There's this it's a Goldilocks sort of metric. You want to be somewhere in the middle, basically. Not too much, not too little. So that's another metric that we give back to the runner more on the injury side of things. And then and foot strike again is difficult, and we try quite hard, because of, in a way, the research that we read suggests that there's not a universal best foot strike for a runner. There may be reasons why certain runners might want to go through a foot strike modification or transition. So, arguably a runner that's maybe had shin or knee problems that is a heavy rear foot striker is probably, if they've tried other stuff, it may be worth their while to think about, okay, rather than being a heavy rear foot striker, I might gradually try and adapt to be more of a midfoot striker. But likewise, somebody that that knows that they've had Achilles or calf problems, probably, the idea that they would want to move to be a front foot or a forefoot striker is, again, the front foot striker puts a lot of additional stress on the sort of, posterior, the rear part, Achilles tendon, calf. So, front foot striking, maybe if that's what they're doing, maybe because somebody said you must be a front foot striker, well, that might be a case of, again, moving back into a more sort of midfoot strike position for them. So those are, some of the metrics that we look at.
So there's not a default optimal pronation amount on an individual basis. But if you use Nurvv, you can measure what your pronation is like. And
Yeah.
if you're injured or if things aren't feeling right, you'll at least have data to be able to adjust consciously. Is that the idea?
Yeah. I mean, in the absence of, this is a kind of a continual work in progress in terms of, what would be nice, what everybody, thinks in a way wearable technology. And I think it's just, to be honest, simplistic, given that, particularly when you talk about injury or performance, it's all it's quite individualized. It's quite multifactorial. So are you ever going to capture enough information to be very definite there are some things that we can be quite definite about in terms of recommendations back to runners, and other things where it is a sort of an individual specific thing. So as much as possible, we try and just say, right, this is you. The baseline isn't some sort of, average runner or ideal runner. The baseline is, this is how you run. Now, we have we've lots of, anecdotes coming back from people that would say, okay, well, let's have a look at your pronation, left and right. We can, let's have a look at, is it different between your left and your right foot? Okay, my right foot is actually, it's neutral or close to neutral. And, on average, that's probably a good thing. It means that you're in that sort of intermediate amount, whereas your left foot, for whatever reason, previous injury, something to do with the static posture of your foot, you've got, excessive pronation. And in fact, you've got some pain, so somebody might have that niggle, I guess, without Nurvv or a similar wearable technology. Maybe they pick up on it, maybe they don't. But we have had people say, well, I went out with Nurvv and it really showed me I did have this sort of imbalance in terms of left and right. And that kind of, motivated me to go and, have a chat to physio or, a therapist. We found something. And now I'm using Nurvv to try and, along with, physical exercises or physical rehabilitation, I'm now using Nurvv to monitor whether I can kind of balance things out a little bit more. So I think that's where, I think that's one of the roles of wearable technology for runners is, sometimes sometimes it's a confirmation, sometimes it actually brings up something new and maybe motivates you to, to concentrate on some aspects of either your conditioning or your running technique.
Stepping back again to running economy. I'm not looking for a formula, but can you tell me roughly what is running economy and how do you calculate it?
Yeah. I mean, as an analogy, then it's, if you think about cars and fuel economy, it is quite similar. So if we talked about miles per gallon for a motor vehicle, the way that and there are different ways of measuring running economy, the way that we look at it is distance per calorie. So whether you're working in meters or feet, but our units in the end are basically how far are you traveling for every calorie that you're putting in. So it's how much running are you getting out, or based on the energy that you're putting into your running. So if calories is that that unit of energy expenditure, so this is the energy that you're burning up. And so for us, the way, and we've done a bit of a transformation to make a high value good, because we think on the whole that's what people's brain kind of would say, okay, high value is good, rather than, because the research way of doing running economy is to make a low value is good, but we're a consumer product, and so we've done a bit of transformation to say that if you can, a running economy of 10 meters per calorie is a better running economy than 8 meters per calorie, because again you're getting more running out of the energy that you're putting in. And roughly how it's calculated is by having an idea of a kind of a real-time calories burn algorithm running. So you've got a kind of an idea of what that at that moment, what's the energy expenditure or the calories being burned, and what speed is this person running at. So I mean, ultimately it's running you said you didn't want a formula, but I'm going to give you one.
I'm happy with the formula.
Yeah. I thought you might be. But the running economy is the burn rate, the energy burn rate or the calorie burn rate divided by the speed. Because what that means is that either if you can be using less energy for a given speed, you've got a higher running economy, or you've got the same amount, for the same energy calorie burn, you're running at a higher speed, then again, you've got a better running economy. And I say that's not typically, if you went to the academic literature, they would be talking about things. So running economy would be measured in a in a sort of oxygen consumption for a given.
I was going to
steady
ask
state.
how you measure energy consumption.
Yeah, it's well, so for us, we're using the sensors on board to, we've got a mapping between, and we've done the sort of lab research to say, people wearing Nurvv, but also so what you're typically doing is wearing metabolic apparatus, so something that can measure your oxygen and your oxygen consumption, your carbon dioxide production. So that's the gold standard, if you like, or the realistic gold standard for measuring energy expenditure is to do sort of the oxygen and carbon dioxide analysis, and you get your energy cost from there. And we've done the mapping between people running under different conditions and what Nurvv can see versus what's actually happening with the metabolics. And then so that's how we do it in the field, is that we've got this idea of we've got an energy burn algorithm, basically speed we get from our sensors, and that's how we get to running economy. And it's just that it's going to why running economy, but it's one of the sort of key physiological parameters that can discriminate against runners. The other ones being things like VO2 max is it's commonly your maximum oxygen uptake. But in a group of runners that have a similar VO2 max, they still perform slightly differently. And there's at least a decent amount of research that says actually the discriminator is the running economy. Is some runners can run more efficiently, and that's what takes them to the similar VO2 max, so similar maximum capacity, but they're just using it more efficiently. So that's one of the reasons why we've sort of chosen running economy as a key metric to then link technique to, because there are lots of things that can affect running economy. One of the things it can is running form, and that's obviously what we are best placed to talk about because of the what we're measuring.
If you don't mind, I'm curious, what else affects your running economy besides form?
I mean, you're into genetics. In any given running session, you're into the environment. Temperature, humidity, running economy. Training status, muscle fiber composition. If you like, general fitness markers. So that yes, there's quite a lot that can fit in, that goes under the umbrella of, factors affecting running economy. So, we are aware that, but I guess in some senses, some of those you can't do anything about. Age, it will affect your running economy. There are certain non-modifiable factors in there, but one group of the modifiable stuff is definitely running form, probably along with the type of training that you're doing as well.
Do you have to ask users, or maybe you can, if you have sensors, you can just acquire it automatically for some of this anyways, or is it not such a strong function of these variables? Yeah,
I mean, so for us, we certainly have the demographics of the user, because throughout our product, there are, a lot, a good number of our algorithms that are affected by, we make sure that, where age is a known factor or sex is a known factor, that we have that. Mass is another thing that, to be honest, controlling body mass definitely has an influence on running economy as well. So we definitely go for the demographics. At the moment, for us, we don't pay too much attention to the environment. It's on the list. It'd be a nice thing to do. I guess what that does is, because for a given running session, one of the things that we're doing is, trying to give the runner back, how did your running economy vary across this session? And I suppose to some extent, those environmental factors we'd expect to be relatively stable. That's not always the case, particularly on an extended run. But it's more like a systematic shift of, it takes you from here to here. So yeah, it would be a nice thing for us to include. It's definitely on the list, but you got to do, you got to work through it, I suppose.
So are you a runner yourself?
Yeah, I've always run. I would probably say it's never been my primary sport. So I'm kind of one of those people I mentioned earlier. In a way, used running for a long time just for enjoyment and as a way to train for other sports. But I mean, I found myself in the London Marathon this year. So so that's October, because that's shifted again. It's shifted for the last couple of years. But I keep entering it, and I keep. For about the last 8 years, I've entered it, and you never get a space because it's hugely popular. And funnily enough, this year I managed to get a space. So I've just started a 20-week kind of intended 20-week program. So I'm about week 2 into that 20 weeks, and so I'm kind of getting back into my running. So I'm enjoying it at the moment. It's although with an October marathon doesn't mean I'm going to have to do all the training through summer, which summers don't get too hot here, but it's still it's still going to be sort of training through the warmer months of the year. But so hopefully I can get to that start line and see how we go. But it's not something I've not done a big road marathon before, so I'm quite looking forward to it. Everybody always says the atmosphere is great and those sorts of things. So so I guess I've always run. And at the moment I'm doing a little bit more with a view to having to get around the marathon.
Okay, so do you use Nurvv Run yourself?
Yeah, yeah, I'm a committed user. So I use it. I think almost all of my runs. I probably, if on the odd occasion that I do like a very off-road run, then maybe I won't take Nurvv with me. But anything other than that, I have it. Well, I think I'm kind of, it helps. I'm, involved in all the testing of the new features anyway. So, I use it as part of, sort of testing the product, but also, it's what I use as my training device, I guess.
Does Nurvv work off-road, like on dirt paths? Do you have to worry about getting dirty on like a muddy trail?
No, not in that second part. There is an interesting point there around, if you like, on the data side or the data side of things around what do you get back. But as a product, then we've designed it, and it was one of the big challenges through the development program was to make sure that the product was capable of surviving running conditions. So we're not talking about going swimming with Nurvv, but we are talking about puddles and rain and whatnot. So it was one of the big sort of hardware technical challenges to make sure that we were happy that we that when we sent this out that it was going to last and it would withstand sort of environments that the runners put themselves through, and therefore it's quite a hostile environment actually going into a shoe. This temperature, there's humidity, there's this kind of genuine moisture. So we spent a lot of time in development around making sure that was possible. So it can definitely withstand trail running. As far as the data goes, I've had a couple of interesting conversations with people, because there's two ways of looking at it. One way is to say, as you trail run, in terms of foot strike, pronation, even cadence and step length, things are going to be, it's going to be variable. It's going to be choppy. You're on a surface, so it's going to mess up my data, isn't it? I guess to which my response is, yes, it's going to change the data you get out, but actually, from a measurement point of view, that's actually a good thing, because if you think about pronation on an uneven surface, then you should expect that to be quite variable. And actually, as the company is kind of giving you that feedback back, I'd be a bit disappointed if we just said, oh, your pronation is just the same in your kind of trail run as it is on the road, because that's unlikely to be the case. So yes, if you're in, so I guess there's an interpretation piece there. That's if what you're doing, if you're using Nurvv to get an idea of, okay, what's my basically what's my baseline technique, then, and we can do this because we can tag runs and such like, so we can drop certain things out. But maybe you don't go to one of your trail runs to say, what's my normal technique? But you can go to your trail runs to say, well, actually, I'm interested. What effect does running on a different surface, or inclines, decline, what effect does that have on some of my running metrics? Because the Nurvv data will change. We know that now. It will, it's quite sensitive to terrain when people are, shifting about in terms of how their foot's landing. Our data is sensitive to different types of footwear as well. So you can do those comparisons. There's not loads and loads of tools within the app to allow, we don't have a shoe comparison sort of feature or anything like that. But if you've done some runs that that were similar but in different shoes, then you can go in and if you're a self-starter on that front, then you should expect our data to change for footwear and for trail runs. And I guess so a bit long-winded from me, but I guess from my part, it does change. Running on different surfaces changes the data. but actually I'm quite comfortable with that. And we have a job to maybe. We're always trying to do better to say, to explain that and do the recommendations off the back of things. But I'm quite comfortable that the data does change because I think your running form changes.
Yeah, that's a fair point. It was clear that, well, I would be surprised if you told me that it didn't change when you're running on variable hardness surfaces or different shoes. I know whenever I've done trail running, it's half the time just stepping on rocks and awkwardly landed trees. Is it comfortable to wear this? So I have a few runner friends, and I ran Nurvv Run by them just to see if they had questions to ask you. And their top concern was just, is it going to be comfortable on a 13-mile run? Can I notice that it's there? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, again, we're putting something into our shoes, so it was one of the big things for us to think about during development, and I wouldn't say that Nurvv is invisible, but I'm used to it. But I did 10 miles this morning, and I was wearing Nurvv, so I'd be quite happy to wear Nurvv on an extended road run, and even a trail run if we're talking paths. I'd say that the one exception for me is on the odd occasion if I'm to go off and do some genuine sort of mountain running, or I'd probably leave it at home, just because again of the when you do have if the ankle's rolling a lot during ground contacts, then we do our insole is connected to a tracker on the side, and you can over an extended period begin to feel it. But for for the runner that's spending most of their time on the road or paths, we've done the testing around actually the mechanical properties testing around what effect does having the Nurvv insole in the shoe, what effect does it make to cushioning, to energy absorption, to bending stiffness. So we sent that off to independent labs, and ultimately when you consider the stack of material in a running shoe, we're about 1 millimeter thick and we're quite flexible. So really we don't make a difference to the actual material properties of a running shoe. So at that point, then it's just with proper installation. And we did comfort testing through development, and it always came back well. And in fact, generally speaking, the more people wear Nurvv or use Nurvv in their running, the kind of in a way the higher the comfort. It's not a case of eventually I realise it starts to become less comfortable. Generally speaking, it was the opposite. It was there is that sort of first impression of, is it making a difference? But generally speaking, as people wear it, they tend to feel that it's, the difference in comfort between it, Nurvv being in and not being in is quite negligible.
Does this insert wear down over time? So normal trainers for me last a few hundred miles. What am I looking at here for this?
So we have had insoles that have lasted longer, but we warranty to 1,000 miles. So that was our target, to be honest, and that's what we warranty to. So you're right. That's maybe it's 2 pairs of trainers, if not 3, for most people. And that's just I guess, to be clear, that's we have, I guess, 3 main components: the insole being one, the tracker or the pods being second, and I guess the phone or the watch being the third one. Now, the bit that wears down is over time is the insole. But ultimately that is replaceable at obviously there's the cost of the system, but the trackers, if you like, the brains, they'll keep on going for forever essentially, and it is possible, just like you would with a pair of trainers, ultimately to replace the insoles, or for the very keen beans, because again, lots of runners have multiple pairs of shoes at the same time. If you don't want to, because it is possible to transfer a Nurvv insole between different pairs of shoes as you wear them on different days, or you can have multiple pairs of insoles if you're particularly keen. So that's one way of doing it. But it is there is as I say, we aim to make sure that we were lasting longer than trainers, and depending on how long you keep your trainers, but it's two or three pairs of trainers before maybe a Nurvv insole needs replacing.
Just out of curiosity, when the insole has reached its end of life, how do you know? Do the pressure sensors just stop functioning?
Well, I mean, it tends to be a bit more gradual than that. But yes, I mean, ultimately, we have a metric that comes through back to, if you like, home base, which tells we've got something that basically tells us the health status of the insole, and it's a little bit around you start here, and eventually things kind of, in terms of sensor output, they do narrow over time. So the sensor ages. So, and I guess if you could take it to the extreme, then you'd start to see, I guess maybe a marked influence on metrics that should be more subtle than that, whether that be pronation or foot strike even. So it does tend to kind of coincide with it just looks a bit older, So I think that's, for most users, that's probably what they're seeing, and then there is a kind of I think there's in a way a nice sort of correlation between how the insole looks and how, generally speaking, how the sensors are still performing. So yeah, I mean, over 1,000 miles in the bottom of a pair of shoes, it's quite a demanding environment for sensors and for hardware. But yeah, so that for the most part, I think that's quite a nice trigger for users to say, actually, and to recognise that they've had it for 1,000 miles, and it's not the cost of a full system to replace it. It's very much a component part of the cost. So for the most part, I think people are happy knowing where it's been and what they've done with it. Most people are kind of happy enough with that lifespan.
Yeah, I'm happily surprised at a lifespan of around 1,000 miles. I was wondering if it was going to be a system of only a few dozen miles, and there's a suggestion maybe of only wearing it when you want to measure some part of your running. It's nice to hear from you that you use it basically all the time. Back in the day, I used to be like an 800-meter runner and sometimes mile, but I'd always wear tracks on the I'd always wear spikes on the track. Can you wear Nurvv Run with running spikes?
You can, but I would accept that that's not how we're designed. That's not how we are designed to work in a way, or that's not our use case. So I mean, it is possible for people that have done that. Obviously, the main thing is that you won't have the main thing is you don't have the removable liner within the shoe, because we are designed to go in underneath and then get placed. So there's no problem in essence. There's not, I don't think, a massive problem in terms of the stiffness. The spikes typically very much stiffer, or the fact that you've got the spikes. That's not really the issue. It's more the I guess the perception or the feeling of the foot in the shoe with Nurvv having to be on top. To be honest, we have people have done it. It's double-sided sticky tape can do a decent job there. So it is possible, but it's I guess we've been developed more with thinking about essentially road running shoes. More your standard sort of running footwear. So it's doable, but not I guess the way it's been developed.
Right. Yeah, I was just wondering because kind of a mediocre runner back then, and certainly worse now, but I would always transition from running kind of correctly to just being a total heel striker somewhere along the race. And it would be nice to know, kind of have some metrics on what went wrong when. But yeah, so another question is, what's the battery life on this kind of look like?
So for this generation of the product, we run it 5 hours as the sort of the battery life for. That's if you're kind of operating at full. You're using all of the sensors basically. So we're basically 5 hours for an outdoor run, and that's that assumes that you're taking in and using the GPS receiver that we have on board. So our GPS receiver. There is a way to quite dramatically increase that battery life. The GPS receiver is a big drain, basically. So if you switch the GPS off, we can operate indoor. You can run an indoor run outdoors, if that makes sense. So you basically go for your run, but know that you're not going to receive a map of your run. You're not going to get the GPS. Now, that takes us in the region of probably, I think it's in the region of 12 hours. So if you were, if you were to go off on a run like that. That would be one way of using Nurvv in one sitting. But as I say, switching off GPS, because we don't, in terms of distance and pace and speed, we actually use a inertial navigation system rather than GPS. So GPS supports what we do on a distance and pace side of things, but it's not our core way of doing distance and pace. So and we made that decision and change, because it was a change, because originally we were going to use GPS for distance and speed, but we made that change for accuracy reasons. INS, in the way we found it to be more accurate, and it does allow us to work just as well indoor as well. Either if you're indoor or if you've got spotty GPS reception, it just doesn't matter to our metrics. Now, it make an influence to the map, but that's it. It doesn't make a difference to our running metrics. So there are some choices to be made there, but so the basic answer is 5 hours, which we kind of, that was, can somebody get around a marathon? Well, most people in 5 hours, and that was kind of our requirement. But there are ways to extend it by switching off some sensors.
Who is Nurvv Run best suited for? Like a beginner, someone that's injured, an elite runner?
I think we have a really nice range of users. I guess if you're looking at Nurvv as a support tool of how are you running and what effects having your performance, probably the genuine elite, those people with coaches and maybe even with access to gait analysis labs, running clinics. They could use Nurvv, but they've maybe got expert sort of support, I guess. So, but we haven't really aimed to target the elite runner, but probably everybody else. I think we'd like to think that there's a use there, and and people will use it differently. Definitely novice runners or quite new runners. I think there's definitely some good take up there in that sort of segment of the running population. So people that are still finding their feet in terms of how they're running. There is an element that as a runner gets more experienced and simply runs more, they will navigate, maybe not in a very direct way, but they might kind of meander towards a running form that works for them. That tends to be a more experienced runner, even if they've never really thought about it, will probably in terms of the cadence and step length, they'll not be far off for them what their optimum values are. But certainly novice runners typically are running at a cadence that actually if they bump their cadence up 5%, maybe even 10%, they'd actually run with better economy at the very least. It'd make running easier for them. So certainly in that bracket where people are still finding their feet around running, hopefully we have some, runners can derive some benefit both in terms of understanding how their technique's changing, but we do have some other more, I guess general tools in there around the training load tool that I mentioned before. So you can use Nurvv to just to manage the amount of running that you're doing, and we've got this thing where ideally you're going to stay in the middle band basically, which means that you're training relatively consistently, or you're not spiking, or you're not doing an incredible amount for a couple of weeks and then coming back to quite a low amount, or the other way around. So because that that's quite well known, different ways to measure it, but it's quite well known that sort of roller coaster way of training is it increases the risk of injury. So that kind of more, that's a well known thing, but there's within Nurvv there's that feature that helps support that. I think probably our biggest sector, and we kind of know this, is around newer runners, not necessarily complete novices, but newer runners. And as you mentioned, I think it was a decent hunch. The other side is those runners that maybe have come across an injury problem and are looking to get back into running, and using a tool to just help them with that. So I think those are definitely two big segments for us.
Nurvv Run is a wearable for your foot. It has a set of sensors that are on the bottom of your feet. From the biomechanics side of things, What other sensors would you like to have on the body to inform you about either injury or how to improve performance for running?
Yeah, nice question. It's definitely something that occupies us quite a lot because, you know, I think for us, the foot based thing's been a good move because you can tell quite a lot about what's going on, but you can't tell everything. You know, we in a position where there are maybe some metrics that would either be doable or just improved by having additional sensors. And I definitely feel that this kind of idea of a network of sensors there is a balance. There's definitely a balance there because you are talking about people that are going out on their for a run, and just how much stuff do they want to wear or spend putting additional sensors on. But we've got and we're not the only people looking at this, but we've got a couple of PhDs running with actually with the University of Bath, so kind of joint projects, and one of them specifically is looking at this idea of additional sensors. And it's quite nice that even with so you've got the foot based stuff, but you tag on wrist based sensor, so in a sports watch basically. And maybe one on the thorax, or a kind of I don't know if you've ever seen more team sport, GPS, they wear GPS receivers on just in between the shoulder blades. You've got those two locations plus the foot based stuff. You can actually it's quite good at categorizing runners. So we had a project that was looking at can those sensors, distributed sensors, and which ones can they categorize elite from novice, or fresh from fatigued. And actually, so you've got some convenient locations where if you merged sensors, you would be in a nicer position. I mean, one of the other PhDs is looking more at, okay, let's take some of this foot based measurement and start looking more at kind of a load monitoring sort of idea, both the applied forces at the ground, but also the sort of the resultant loads at maybe a joint analysis, so ankles, knees, and hips. How much work is being done at those joints, or how are they working, and maybe for us we've got stuff down here, but maybe something more at the top of that chain, which would be, let's say, pelvis, for argument's sake. That could probably support some of that analysis. So it's a nice one. It's one that, well, there's lots of research out there, and we're also kind of actively looking at what we might do in the future around that sort of network of sensors. And that's even just the pure sort of motion side of it. Obviously, you could start to try and integrate with some of those sensors more some of the physiological measurements as well. And for we do the one that would be expected at the moment is that we can, we can take in information from a chest strap heart rate monitor. So we don't have a heart rate monitor at the foot, but if somebody's wearing a chest strap or a watch based that can transmit on Bluetooth, we can take that into our system. So we do have that information already coming in, but there are there's other, I guess, physiological parameters that would be quite nice to add into that mix as well over time. Always remembering that, yeah, just even if people are really interested, they don't. You got to always remember the factor around wearables, and make them as convenient and as unobtrusive as possible. And there's always a balance there, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. On the data side of things, so some wearables I get a little bit annoyed by because I really like to have access to the raw data if possible. Does Nurvv Run make it possible to have like basically the time series data of like pressure as a function of time to like a user?
Yeah, well, I think we'd probably be in the middle ground here, so you might get a little bit annoyed with Nurvv, and that's not intentional. That's a matter of, to be honest, that's a matter of time at the moment, and where we've managed to, I guess, prioritize what we do, because it's something that's more on our list. So we can, so Nurvv data can find its way up to third party. So Strava, for example, is I know it's popular in the States as well, or Garmin Connect as well. And that allows, we are, it's an interesting one. So, we go to the third party ones at the moment. That allows us to put our basic information up there and allows the user to then, get that back down. That tends to be the metrics that are, I guess, are already in their their toolkits, I suppose, are their APIs. So, it tends to be the ones that you'd also get off the watch. There are some of our metrics that, we'd quite like to get up there that actually, we haven't yet managed to find a way to get some of those up. So it's a work for us personally. It's a work in progress. So we've got a consumer app. We are also, in terms of taking Nurvv into new fields, we're actively, we're doing some more sort of, I guess, what you'd call more healthcare clinical projects at the moment with the same technology platform. And for that, we're working with partners. So that's less of an individual consumer thing, but working with, I get, kind of called, B2B, but, essentially working with other organizations. And, we're finding ways, because that's the type of information that they want. So yes, we do, not in our consumer product at the moment, but because we're doing it, for more of a B2B type approach, then, the hope is that over time we can then gravitate some of the work that we're doing on the sort of healthcare clinical side. We can bring some of those tools so that, our users can get a bit more access to the raw data, because we get the request, and it's not something that we're holding on to. It's just for us, again, I think I've already said, a relatively small group that can work on some things that they can't work on everything all at once. It's just got to find its way to the top of the list, basically.
No, that's good to hear. I mean, the list of things that I have to do personally just like grows monotonically increasingly every single day. It's like, so I imagine startups, especially, you're not academia, you need to make money at some point. It's good to hear that it's not vehemently opposed by,
No, and we again, it's both in terms of delivering back to individual users. We would like to do more. We are going to do more. We need to get to it. And likewise with the data set in general, we've got, we do have thousands of people running around with Nurvv, and I've come from the injury prevention background. It's the type of data set that I would have, really, as an academic researcher, I, really have loved. So we do want to do more with our data set. We're using it to learn about how people run and how they're using it, and what sort of metrics are getting returned. But in the fullness of time, we would like to be part of broader initiatives around Nurvv data or data coming from elsewhere, but Nurvv being part of the system. Actually, genuinely, the thing about running, and we touched on it before, around what can you say to the user about how they run and what it means. Well, some of those recommendations at the moment are quite hard to give, because, to be honest, the science isn't there. Running form and injury, it's not straightforward. There's not a one-to-one relationship. It's multifactorial. But so therefore, without, so one way to try to get there is to get, big data sets and have enough data so that you can deal with, a lot of this sort of confounding factors. And we, in the fullness of time, that's one of the things that we'd like, the Nurvv database to be used for. Actually, particularly on injury, less so on performance, but particularly on injury, one of the things that's actually the most difficult bit is not so much the running data, the metric data. It's actually the injury side of it. Is how do you as a, well, whether it's us or an academic partner, how do you get good information on injury and pain from runners that are not, they're out. Not everybody's got the same access to medical facilities. Runners will run with injury. They are injuries, but they're not necessarily going to see the same clinic or, people that you're also talking to. So it's actually the injury side that's the difficult part of that sort of jigsaw, in the sense of being able to, because we're not very good at self-diagnosing injuries, and neither we should be, because we're not clinicians. But, but to get that, you'd want the detail. But actually, all we can really say is, I've got a sore left knee, and that's valuable information. I've got a sore left knee. But if you're trying to do what are the risk factors for specific injuries, it's, you need that extra detail. So, but so both individual users and more in a sort of a general, what can we do to understand running a bit more? It's definitely on the radar, with some challenges to overcome.
Yeah, I saw that you have accumulated something like 100 million foot strikes.
Closer to 300 million, but so we've, but it all makes sense now in terms of cadence. So yes, it is. It's nice. We're starting to generate a data set that, the form coach feature that we talked about before is probably the first time that we've for an individual, we've gone kind of harvesting their entire profile and give information back. Up until then, it's been a little bit more, session by what have you done this session? What have you done this? What have you done in the last 28 days? But the form coach for us was one of the first times that we've said, we're going to use all of your running. And ultimately, what we should be able to do with form coach and other similar things, say this is all of your running, and we're placing it in the context of the, looking at the much bigger data set. So there's reasons for us to do that in terms of features that we'd like to deliver to our consumers, and there are also the sort of bigger, slightly more, I guess, altruistic reasons around can we work with the rest of the sort of sports medicine community to answer some of the big questions that would ultimately help, I guess, practice in terms of clinical practice, but actually would then would feed into products like ours, which could then give their recommendations with a bit more concrete evidence. Because at the moment it's you might think, well, again, I've already said it, you kind of think, oh, foot strike means this or pronation means this, and actually the evidence is when you go into it is much more, well, it's not black and white, it's it's a bit more.
Yeah, we talked with a data science professor here, and he pointed out that like one person's worth of data is usually not so helpful, but if you can start getting thousands and thousands of users, then you can start driving kind of trends and go back the other way and have personalized insight based off that larger data set. There's some small number of minutes left, and there's two things I really wanted to kind of run through you with. The first one is basically Nurvv Run is, the way a physicist would describe it, is you have a set of pressure sensors on your feet that give you time series data. It seems to me like you can do a lot with this. Like you could measure people when they're walking, when they're like squatting, or like any sort of like weightlifting movement for like kind of pressure distributions, like left, right, or like front, back. What are your thoughts on using this insole for other areas of athletics?
Yeah. So I agree. And yeah, I mean, and one of the issues is actually you could probably, if you sat for 10 minutes, you could actually think of, a lot of applications. And that's, we, again, going back to the whole thing about being, a relatively small group and trying to get products out the door. So I would say we've been quite laser focused through the development process and for the initial launch around, running. We're trying to build a running product. But we have always known that, the technology platform itself, there's other things that could be done with it. And I mentioned briefly, and it is something, but only, in, the last period of time, so months rather than years, beginning to look at, you could, going into the clinical space basically, or into the healthcare space. So, gait analysis, can be part of, in gait analysis in hospitals, it can be the motion capture and looking at joint angles. But actually, there's some metrics that Nurvv can measure that measures that are the same that you'd get from the motion capture. And there have been, on a clinical level, people looking at foot pressures. So whether you're talking about orthotics, whether you're talking about identifying, sort of neuropathies, so high pressure zones for people with diabetes, for example, is one of the issues. So there's lots of applications, and so you're right about the basic principle, pressure sensors, time series. Looking, we can do a bit more with just looking at that pressure map. Essentially we don't have a matrix. It's not, you wouldn't call it a map or a matrix of sensors. It's individual spots, but we have 16, and actually even for the running product, that was there've been there were examples of people doing it with 3 sensors. I felt from the start that wasn't sufficient for some of the metrics we wanted to do. But likewise, I don't feel that for actually to give the level of detail we needed, I didn't feel that we needed 300 sensors or more than that, because actually one of the first things you do with a pressure map like that is to break it down into zones. So 300 becomes 8 zones very quickly anyway in terms of interpretation. So I felt, so we got 16 sensors, but we could look at, how, so, during walking, whether that's normal walking, impaired walking, we've got, the cerebral palsy gait, We've got toe walking is an example. You've got idiopathic toe walking, which there's people literally walking on the front of their feet, which can have a physical diagnosis or might resolve, but sometimes treated if it's extreme. So there's lots of clinical applications for the technology platform, as there are just saying running's not the only sport where you might be interested in what the foot's doing. So yeah, weightlifting absolutely. I don't know, golf, skiing, snowboarding, it's quite a few areas, and for us it's about just not biting off too many at the one time. But yeah, we're excited, but we are excited about the other areas as well. Keep building the Run product, but also going into the different applications as well.
Is there a weight limit that you know of? For example, like, if someone were to buy this and get under a squat bar with 500 pounds, would that be a bad idea?
So 5. Well, I can say we when we specified it, the product, so went through the designing the sensors and testing the sensors. I always had the view that at the very least we knew that we were focused on endurance running. But I wanted to make sure we were okay for other more dynamic activities. So, for example, sprinting. Now, the difference between the loads that you get from endurance running versus sprinting is quite different. So, in a relative, like I call it a jog, you are at you're a body weight and a bit, so 1 and a bit body weights. Whereas sprinting you're at 4 body weights at peak, peak force wise. So I know we're good for sprinting. So let's say on ballpark 4 body weights of peak force, and the sensor will keep. But I know that's what we've tested. That's what we've tested to. If there was a more extreme, we would have to go back and just make sure we were ready for it. But I know that we've got a nice linear sort of. We've got good linearity through to 4 body weights. So somebody doing a heavy lift, you're talking about, if you say 500 pounds, I mean that's I work in kilograms, but you may be at three body weights in total, person plus double their body weight, I guess, in terms of the bar. So yeah, I'd be confident in those situations. The ones situations that we would need to look again are the really high impact type situations. So. You're talking about, I don't know. I would need to look again. A triple jumper, So
I was going to say jumping. I would imagine is
jumping and very extreme landings. For transient periods of time. Those peak forces are really quite high, and you could argue, you could get into the conversation around. Do you just not quite capture the peak, but those would be the situations that I would look again. But anything below that, I'd be quite confident with our current setup that we would be okay for that.
You might also be able to extrapolate the peak, I guess, if you just overload your sensor but how long it's overloaded for, at least estimate it. And then the other, okay, that's good to know. It's not like everyone except for probably like extremely elite level weightlifters would probably be okay. Good to know. The other question is this pressure sensor system that you've developed. Have you thoughts of putting it in other areas? I think you'd have to use it more as just like a diagnostic tool. But for example, something that's important in weightlifting is really exerting a lot of kind of squeezing pressure through your hands to kind of get the mind muscle connection going. And it would be nice to have some kind of feedback on how hard is it, or a kind of a reminder. So I could imagine you putting these pressure sensors on kind of like weightlifting gloves. No one really likes to wear weightlifting gloves, but you could imagine for testing purposes, or more generally putting these sensors on the inside of a weightlifting belt. Could you say any words about the prospect of putting this pressure sensor on other parts of the body, basically?
Yeah, well, I mean, definitely from a technical perspective, I could, I agree. I mean, ultimately, the way that we have an insole that's got 16 spot sensors that are arranged, to kind of hopefully, do a good job for capturing the pressure on the foot. But these are ultimately single spot sensors that can be arranged in any. So I'm not saying that you'd want to take an insole as it stands and kind of put it, wrap it around the bar or anything like that. But in terms of the basic technology, then yeah, I mean, absolutely, you can. you're right. I can imagine that, you'd maybe you'd look at different sizes of, there's no reason that the size of the sensor has to be the same, but, do a quick analysis and arrange them any way you'd like. So, yeah, I guess at that point you're talking about a different, I guess a different component at the end of the system, and you'd have to think about if it's a more sensors or less sensors. For us, there's work that would need to be done, but that's just kind of processing, and you kind of strapping in. I mean, I know there are more sort of I guess slightly more clinical or industrial pressure mapping systems that work in that way, where you've kind of got the same interface, and but they've got lots of different ways of kind of configuring where the sensors are and what the application is. So, so I guess that's the proof of the pudding, is that other people have done it in that way, and therefore it, I suggest that it's definitely doable, and it would, it'd be nice, like quite a nice application as well.
One last question, just because I know I have to let you go. I couldn't find any, but do you know, are there other competitors that are, wearable pressure monitoring Insole, anything like this?
There are a couple, and with most people coming out from maybe a slightly different focus. A couple of the big footwear manufacturers have done quite, in a way, the sort of the straightforward, going back quite a few years, in terms of integrating into shoes. That's been tried, and both in terms of pressure sensors, and I mean, there's some people still doing, sort of more of an IMU approach in the shoe. So it's it's quite an active space. We're not the only company in there, and with everybody doing it probably in a similar sort of way, but maybe I say either targeting slightly different market sectors, or maybe with the technology platform. I mean, there's probably some metrics that everybody would say, okay, well, that's obvious, we're going to do that metric, but after that, in a way, and we've not fully exploited all of the various metrics that we could measure within the running product. Partly that's time, but partly that's so we don't overwhelm people too much, because it's still, runners. There's a lot of acceptability, particularly for runners. There's a lot of acceptability for technology. Most people wear a watch. A really high proportion of people wear a watch, and some people wear, you've got pods and whatnot. But it's still relatively, it's still a relatively new thing to have this much information coming back from every run that you do, sort of thing. So there is, again, that balance around, kind of trying not to overwhelm and get too esoteric around, some of the metrics, because you could. I mean, you could keep going until whenever, in terms of, or say, let's look at this in a slightly different way and whatnot. But that means that across the I guess the landscape of particularly Insole products and whatnot, that does mean that people have decided to tread slightly. There's kind of almost a core of metrics, the ones we've been talking about, the more the performance ones and the cadence and the step length. There's that core, but then after that, people have maybe taken slightly different directions.
Right. Yeah, I was just curious because your company, when I was looking through it, stood out to me. I certainly wasn't interested in having a whole shoe be smart. The fact that it's an insole seemed useful, and you can change shoes. And I was particularly intrigued by your 16 sensor array and 1 kilohertz data rate. But anyways, I think I've used up all the time I can for you. So I wanted to really thank you for coming on and talking with me. I really learned a lot.
No, thanks, Bobby. I enjoyed it, and thanks for your time.